Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And a reminder, as we always do on this program, that when we say go green, we're not talking about mere environmentalism. We're talking about deep ecology, a recognition of the interconnectedness of all of life. And whether you come at that from a deep eco spiritual perspective, or a hard science perspective, or like me, you say those are both completely valid ways to look at it. We recognize that everything we do to the web of life, we ultimately do to ourselves. And what we are doing now is literally destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. So at Redneck Gone Green, this is a truth telling zone. We're going to talk about the need to get back to the indigenous worldview and a interconnected balance and reciprocal relationship with nature. And today's show, y'all, is one, if you want to talk about out of balance, man, this is Koyaanisqatsi gone berserk. Because before we jump in, I want to do as we always do to welcome co-host Shane Knight to the conversation. Shane, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, David. Made it through the weekend, and it looks like spring's just around the corner, so I couldn't be happier. Well, actually, I
Well,
could be a lot happier, but
you may not be, yeah, you couldn't be more happy about things thawing out there in New York City. But I'll tell you what, Shane, what is happening now with this slow moving or not so slow moving administrative coup d'etat of the Trump administration? He promised shock and awe, and boy, is he delivering. Let's just real quick point out the Trump administration in the last week continues to purge thousands of federal employees. But wait, there's more. Elon Musk, completely unelected, unaccountable billionaire, and his staffers are infiltrating the Treasury Department and several federal government agencies. Oh, but wait, federal employees are reporting that there are data purges and alterations going on up and down the federal government, the shutdown of USAID and layoff of a global workforce. There's a federal funding freeze, an assault on immigrants, threats to the Department of Education, removal of the FEC chair. I mean, it goes on, Shane.
I know. Don't forget about the USPS. I just saw that today. I was like, oh, great. They're going to privatize that and run it straight into the ground. And you know who's going to suffer the most from that? It's going to be country folk.
You got it, man. I mean, rural people who are absolutely dependent upon the U.S. Postal Service. There ain't no doubt about it. I also want to, you lifted up something that's going on with that I thought was really interesting about a little bit of song that was going on. Shane, what's that all about?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you saw it yesterday or not, but yesterday the U.S. Army Choir was requested by the White House to come out and sing a song from the musical Les Miserables or Les Mis. And now it's not the first time that the U.S. Army Choir has been requested to do this by the White House. Donald Trump emerged, came out with his candidacy. I don't know if you remember this back in November of 22, and he walked out to that song. And the song is all about the French Revolution and rising up against fascism. Now, it's funny to me that they chose this song because they're so stupid. They literally think that they are the oppressed people rising up against the oppressors, or that's the image they're trying to portray. But either way, what they've had happen over the last 24 hours is people have picked up on this. It's all over TikTok. I'm sorry, I had to pull up the name of the song, and I can't really remember it right now. But what they did, the song, the U.S. Army comes out, and people have taken it and turned it on its head, meaning, we know you're not the oppressed people here, you idiot. Everybody else is applauding the U.S. Army for coming out and singing this song and basically making fun of them to their faces. I think it's a great thing. We'll see how it plays out in the media. People are swinging one way and the other, but for the large part, what I've seen is people are actually laughing at them and cheering the army for having done something, I guess, quote unquote, rogue. But at either way, it is a shit show. And the what did you call it? The coup d'état, the onslaught, the barrage of happenings. It's a little dizzying. It's a little dizzying, and I'm glad we've got the guests that we've got today. So maybe we can get into it.
Well, let's just jump right into it. And as you say, we've got a fantastic guest to talk about this. Friends of Redneck Gone Green will recognize and remember, I hope, my dear friend Shahid Buttar, who is going to be joining us. Shahid is a constitutional law scholar. He's also a DJ, an MC, a former anti war congressional candidate. He is a brilliant thinker. He's also a snowboard instructor and, again, a very dear friend. Welcome back to Redneck Gone Green, Shahid.
Thanks for having me, David. It's great to be with you again, and great to be with you, Shane.
Thank you. It's good to meet you.
So Shahid, let's just jump right into it, man, because you heard my sort of list of the litany of things that the Trump administration has got going on, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that's going on, though, there is an effort to use the courts to try to slow it down, if not stop it. And that's part of the reason I thought of you. And of course, when I researched, I found out you had already written an exceptionally, I thought, astute Substack piece on exactly this topic. I mean, and I do want to quote it: "Our courts can't defend democracy." So, Shahid, I'm going to turn it over to you to say, help us figure out how do we make sense of what's going on, both with the Trump administration and the legal system, and our effort to use the legal system to protect ourselves.
Thanks for the question, and I think it's a fascinating angle to consider at the moment. To what extent Trump's return to Washington basically represents the fruit on a poisoned tree that was, a generation in the making. And a lot of people who maybe don't pay as much attention to politics or constitutional law over the last month in particular have been up in arms about the supposed constitutional coup that is currently underway with the onslaught or barrage or blitzkrieg, choose your image, that the new administration is conducting vis-a-vis the administrative state. And I appreciate the point, and it is unfortunately reflects a great deal of ignorance about recent US history. And for better or worse, I describe the co-optation of the executive branch not as the point at which a constitutional coup takes root, but the point at which it becomes too difficult to ignore. And that's the point we are at now. But the root, I think, lies in the co-optation of the judiciary a generation ago. And, it might just be the, memory of a young lawyer for whom it was controversial at the time. But when the Bush versus Gore decision was announced in 2000, this was a decision by the Supreme Court that effectively chose the presidency, chose the president at the time, George W. Bush. The consequences of that decision, one of them, which goes frequently overlooked, was the indirect appointment of the justices by their predecessors. And that's something that the Constitution is very careful to explicitly prohibit. The branches are supposed to be separated. They're supposed to have powers against each other to check and balance each other. And one of them relates to succession. The president is supposed to choose, the people choose the president picks the justices, the Senate confirms them, and then they serve for life. Except when the justices chose the president in 2000, it introduced this circularity. And we could tug on the thread at different points in time to, sort of reflect on how that took shape from, the Citizens United decision to the ones immunizing Trump for criminal prosecution. There's a bunch of cases that the Supreme Court went on to decide. Dobbs comes to mind, the case that overturned Roe versus Wade. But setting aside the court's jurisprudence, just focusing particularly on the relationship between the justices who decided Bush versus Gore and their successors is interesting. The next Chief Justice, William Rehnquist was the Chief Justice at the time. The next Chief Justice was appointed by the president that he chose in the case, George W. Bush. That was John Roberts, is now the Chief Justice, still serving to this day, 25 years later. And that is the court at the top of the system before which advocates are trying to do everything from defend the integrity of the federal workforce, immigration rights, privacy and security of the data of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans. All of these issues are going before courts, which were co-opted not recently, but a generation ago in plain sight. And, I find it something between long overdue and amusing to hear liberals wringing their hands about a constitutional coup under the Trump administration, which ultimately was made inevitable by the co-optation of the court. And if we think about this moment from a constitutional perspective, the executive branch is run amok, effectively dysfunctional to the extent it's eating itself. And Congress is dysfunctional just because it can't decide anything except, how better to screw over the future. And the courts are co-opted. And I'd look particularly at the decision that announced the immunity for President Trump with respect to acts committed while he was in office. That was a declaration of fealty. And to pretend that the courts have any independence at all has been a stretch since 2000. And I think it's even, laughably so now. And, none of this brings me any joy to observe. I wish over the generation that we could have done something about it. Some people in positions could have made different choices, but we are where we are. And that's it in a nutshell.
I really appreciate, Shahid, you sort of giving that reminder about Bush versus Gore. I also want to point out that there has been, like Obama and Biden had the opportunity to actually use the power of legislation to address these things, and the ability to appoint justices that would have had a different approach and declined to do it. So, Shahid, I'm going to ask you, am I being too harsh here?
No, not at all. I mean, it's absolutely the case that Obama and Biden screwed the pooch when they had opportunities, particularly to appoint justices to the Supreme Court. They did appoint justices who we might describe fairly as liberal, but Justice Kagan was an academic, renowned for her brilliance and ability to sway people with different perspectives, but a professor. Justice Sotomayor brings a different view to the law, but there were opportunities, any number of voices who were sort of like lost on the cutting room floor would have been responding to the judicial right wing, not just as middle of the road voices, but actually as visionaries for a progressive vision of the law. And, those are people, for instance, who advocated at the NAACP. Pam Karlan comes to mind. Those are people who'd done visionary work as advocates for instance, at the ACLU. David Cole comes to mind. Like these are voices who could have made a difference as justices who who won't. And even the liberal wing of the court is, they're brilliant people, but they're not particularly committed to a liberatory vision of the law. And those are the kinds of voices that Biden and Obama passed up at a point in time when those voices might have really made a difference. I mean, I would particularly single out the voice of Antonin Scalia. There was a point in time when Justice Scalia was the outlier on the bench, by far its most conservative member, always writing opinions in the minority. And he swung for the fence ideologically. And over the course of a generation, he swung the entire court. And there's no Scalia on anything that purports to be the left. There are five, frankly, six right-wing justices, and we have three that are middle of the road. And there's nothing like a progressive jurist on the Supreme Court. There are many in the circuit courts, all of whom were passed over, when the opportunities came to appoint new justices. And the only thing I would add, David, to the sort of critique you offered is that Congress also screwed the pooch hugely. And I'm thinking specifically at the point in time, this was late in the second Obama term. He nominated Merrick Garland to fill a seat, and Congress, led by Republicans at the time, so somewhat opportunistically, declined to even consider confirming his nomination under the rationale that there was a presidential election soon underway. When they turned around and did exactly that when Trump was in office, so this double standard with respect to confirmation certainly played a role. But there are plenty of things that Democrats could have done if they seriously gave a damn about defending democracy, and they didn't at a time when it could have mattered. And now they're sort of, opportunistically braying about it after having, to mix my metaphors, like let all the horses out of the barn. But
I got to tell you, Shahid, it does remind me that to remember the role that the Democratic Party leadership are playing. And to be clear, y'all, I always make a distinction between rank and file Democrats who are infinitely more progressive than the elected leadership of the Democratic Party, who are infinitely more progressive than the funders who actually run that joint over there, right? So I think it's really worth pointing out that the neoliberals within the Democratic Party, I'm going to say it plain, Shahid, they would rather work with fascists than allow a progressive, much less a leftist, anywhere near the halls of power. Like, I think it's just, we got to really be very clear that neither the courts are going to save us, but neither are the Democratic Party leadership going to save us. It's up to us.
I
No
want to
question.
know this fucking, lots of people are out there sitting here listening to this, and they're shaking they're nodding their head. Yeah, of course, we know the Democrats would rather get in bed with fascists. Why? Aside from the obvious, they're just making money like everybody else. But what's the real underlying that they just don't give a fuck? I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
at what
I think
point does it stop being their country like it is ours at the same time? They live that far outside of everything? Are we that far separated from our own government?
it does feel to me like maybe you're being too charitable to the figures we're talking about, because the Democratic leadership, they are capitalists before they are Americans, and their commitment
Thank
to
you.
democracy is, thin at best. And Nancy Pelosi said it outright. There was a forum when I was running against her. It was a college student, I believe, who asked her, some question, I think about restricting insider trading by members of Congress, and she responded shamelessly, talking about how we members of Congress are capitalists, and that's the problem, because capitalism and democracy are not aligned values in any way. There's a presumption that they are, and many political scientists pretend that they are, because historically, circumstantially, they did emerge together in many places. But capitalism is based on, and it ensures political inequality, economic inequality, while democracy requires political equality. So you have political equality and economic inequality fighting against each other as defining principles. And I think you nailed it. The reason the Democrats are in bed with fascists is because it's good for business. And ultimately, particularly post Bill Clinton's co-optation of the Democratic Party in the 90s, the Democratic Party is much more committed to Wall Street and capital than it has been to any defensible principle that at any point in time in the past may have animated the party's commitments. I see this demonstrated especially vividly and perversely in the context of military industrial corruption. So, obviously, Biden and Obama did very little to introduce any meaningful accountability at the Pentagon for generations of continuing fraud, waste, and abuse. When Bernie Sanders proposed to cut the Pentagon budget by 5%, you saw what happened to him, right? Just like waves of disinformation, the entire centrist field coalescing at the 11th hour to block his route to the nomination, and just all kinds of chicanery out in public. He proposed half of what the Trump administration is proposing to cut from the Pentagon budget. And when he was, taking an axe to Washington, that blitzkrieg and barrage you were talking about before, David, a lot of people, I think, are rightfully up in arms about it and really concerned. And there was a presumption at the outset, I think, by many of us, that the Pentagon would be spared. That, of course, he's going to cut health and human services, right? I mean, we would expect that from Trump. But, he wants to be the commander-in-chief of the world's strongest military. And so the corruption that we're concerned about would not be the object of any focus. And miraculously, I think, I'm loath to give the administration any credit, certainly loath to give Defense Secretary Hegseth any credit, but he's forcing the Pentagon to consider substantial cuts on the order of 5% every year for the entirety of the administration, amounting to double-digit percent cuts over time. And it's just bizarre to me that Democrats would be so weakly committed to the anti-war peace vision that was the party's defining mantra in the Vietnam era, to then now become so, Obama was elected on an anti-war platform because he opposed the Iraq War. And in not even a generation, right? We're talking about 15 years, the party has swung so far to the right that they got outflanked by fascists. And that's such a revealing indictment of a Democratic leadership that has done everything conceivably possible to subvert democracy in America when they had their hands on the switch. Yeah. And now they're worried, because the inevitable result has come to pass. But it's bizarre to me that it would take Republicans to propose a 12% cut to the defense budget. That's absolutely insane.
I think one thing that that I try to remind myself, and that is, again, the difference between, I think we make a mistake if we just say the Democrats. We have to be really clear about the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party that's actually in control of that apparatus. Because for a neoliberal, remember, neoliberals are basically market forces uber alles, right? Like the market, the market, the market. And so for a neoliberal, they are about empire and global plunder, but they want order in order to facilitate the kind of plunder that they're involved with. I would argue that Trump and what Trump represents are basically oligarchs. And what oligarchs want is chaos in order to facilitate the kind of plunder that they do. Make no mistake about it. What unites the leadership of the Democratic Party and the leadership of the Republican Party, whether it's MAGA or the old style Republicans, a commitment to an imperial US foreign policy and domestically a capitalist economy. You put those two things together, and it's always a power over extractor view. The Democrats want it to be a little kinder and a little gentler and, a little nicer version. Put a velvet glove on the iron fist, if you will. But
yeah, Democrats want fascism with DEI, right? Like that's their vision.
Oh my God, Shahid Buttar, you got to say it again because that line laughs. They want what?
Democrats want fascism with DEI. That's their vision. That's the neoliberal wing you're talking about. And I fear that it's not just the wing. I fear that it's the wing, the head, the breast of the bird, like all of the bird with some, progressive vestiges maybe on one wing. It's like, that's the question is the Democratic Party existentially lost or not? And I'm pretty confident that nothing good is ever coming out of it.
Yeah, to me, look, I remember when you ran for Congress against Nancy Pelosi, and I remember the excitement that was happening in the city of San Francisco around your campaign. Every social change agent I knew, every activist I knew was excited about your campaign. And what I saw, the Democratic Party leadership, but the corporate arm of that party, Shahid, they brought out the long knives against you, right? That they fought you harder than they've ever dreamed about fighting Trump or fascists. Like it was astounding to me. And as you know, I'm a Green. I'm not even a member of the Democratic Party, but I was stunned at the level of just vitriol that they had against a genuine progressive running in the Democratic Party primary.
I mean, I give it to you on two levels. The parts for me that was painfully obvious was the sort of racism of my character assassination, but the part that I think is more relevant, frankly, to the political system and went entirely overlooked, even though I was saying it in the context of a contested primary, was that the Democratic establishment was actively facilitating Trump's agenda during his first term. Nancy Pelosi was getting credit for supposedly opposing him because she, on one occasion, ripped up a speech after the State of the Union, and on another occasion, she was photographed pointing her finger at him across a table in the White House. But everything his administration did, she wrote the checks for. She was the Speaker of the House in a Democratic-led House when Trump was first in office. Everything he did, from the border wall to deploying CBP armed goons to suppress movement for Black Lives protests in cities around the country, particularly Oakland and I think Madison, Wisconsin, I believe, Kenosha, sorry. In these places, like it was Democrats writing the checks. And it was Democrats who slow-walked impeachment. It was Democrats who decided that the president's corruption would not be part of the impeachment proceedings. At every turn, the Democratic leadership was actively facilitating Trump's policies while trying to claim credit for opposing him. And what really pisses me off in retrospect was how on both sides of the equation, both the character assassination of a voice of color, that I'm not going to, well, I'll just leave it at that. And just to be clear, my character assassination relied on smearing Latino whistleblowers who were trying to come forward with evidence of a smear campaign orchestrated by Democrats to protect an oligarch who has never debated an opponent once, faced a public debate over her policies once in the now 37 years she's been in office. I mean, it's honestly absurd. And San Francisco calls itself a liberal bastion. I mean, I have not lived in a more racist place in my life. And I've lived in Washington, D.C. and Houston, Texas, and St. Louis, Missouri, and Salt Lake City, Utah. none of them compare to the smugness and ignorance of the white supremacy in San Francisco. But on both sides of the equation, that and the ignoring the Democratic leadership's complicity with Trump and his policy agenda, on both fronts, the press got rolled prolifically. Journalists are just tools to promote whatever either lies suit the careers of Democratic Party politicians. I face that. Or they're there to just sell whatever the next war is. And we've seen plenty of that over our nation's history, from Vietnam to Ukraine to, God only knows what's going to happen with China now with, Trump in office and the media kowtowing to curry favor with him. The dedication to the establishment of whatever passes for journalism in the United States, instead of a commitment to adversarially exposing corruption, which is what journalism is supposed to be ethically rooted in, I think that is one of the unfortunate seeds of the dysfunction that has come to bear such rotten fruit.
I really appreciate that, because it's reminding me of Al Gore back in 2000. And it was very obvious, Shahid, that Al Gore was more interested in maintaining his status in good stead with the ruling class and the predatory class than he was to fight to secure the election, which we now he actually won. If you had actually counted all of the recount but let's thank the journalist who actually went through, got access to all of the ballots in Florida, and a full recount as opposed to just the very small one in a couple of precincts. Al Gore won that election. And it was more important for Al Gore to maintain his status as part of respectability politics than to fight to secure the election that he won. And if we understand that Shane, it's back to your earlier, question. I think I took your question to be heartfelt. What the hell? Why aren't the Democratic Party leadership really fighting this? Because at the end of the day, they are more interested in the country club membership and supporting capitalism than they are any semblance of what we would call just economic democracy or fairness or racial justice. I don't care how many times Nancy Pelosi puts on kente cloth and she and Chuck Schumer, kneel down on one knee, which I got to say, that to me, Shahid, was like, now I've seen everything. Like the level of absolute chicanery and just ridiculousness. Pandering was it was too much. It was too much.
Well, I don't even see an end in sight for it either. They're going to keep doing the same old shit as long as that old guard's in place. They're going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And I want to go back to your point, Shahid, about the whole military-industrial complex. What I've seen in my own personal experience in the military and seeing it firsthand, I just want to throw this out there. I don't know how people will react to it, but from my personal experience, I do not see any real outcome from an American intervention in any war since World War II as anything other than the proving grounds for a fucking weapon system. They had a proving ground for the weapon system just to sell it. Every conflict we've ever been in, even in Afghanistan, they're trying to get the rounds shifted from what the NATO regular round for the M16 and several other machine guns share the same similar round. They shoot the same round. They're trying to change that so that they're forced then to buy American bullets. And it's just, I'm so disgusted and disillusioned by the whole thing. And I know all of you out there listening are too. And I'm so people are going to get pissed off, and I'm surprised to see how fast some of the Trump supporters in the MAGA world have actually gotten pissed off over the last, how many days are we now? 28.
Well, I go in two different directions with this. There's the one predictable way in which MAGA supporters would grow disaffected, which is when their benefits that they get through some sort of federal program get cut off, and I expect to see more of that. But I've been really, just to go back to the military piece, it is astounding to me that the Trump administration would so effectively prove to be a wrecking ball to the military-industrial establishment that was founded during the Second World War. Remember the first critic of it, the military-industrial establishment, was its creator. the then president, former U.S. war hero Dwight Eisenhower, who warned us on national television in 1961 that it would destroy democracy in America and that it would come for our rights and liberties. And his speech is chilling to read in contemporary terms. He was explicit about the threat that it posed to democracy. And he said that we had to create this to fight the fascists, watch it, or it's going to eat your lunch. And well, welcome to exactly the prediction that he foresaw. But it's incredibly ironic to me that after then this accretion of military industrial corruption for 75 years, wars for resources around the planet, as you put it, testing arenas for weapon systems, all of the corruption that Ike foresaw, after 75 years, when fascism came to the U.S. waving a flag and it's unapologetic and overt in the White House, the very first thing it did was go after that same defense establishment. And so that, to me, one of the really fascinating, in the manner of like a fight between like Godzilla and King Kong, maybe is like this war between the new version of fascism and the old version of fascism. I mean, like the previous American fascists were willing to overlook things like medical debt and homelessness and wars for profit because, we had DEI. So like, it's got to be okay. And, all of the identitarian commitments of Democrats where they like throw, random nods to different constituencies, the way they co-opted and sort of like subverted, I think, the gay community to serve a Democratic Party agenda, that to the way they do every minority community, pandering. Maybe you'll get a judicial appointment, but will you get any of the policies that you're clamoring for generations? No. And so that kind of model of fascism, which is just, softer, let's say, it's, it's a velvet glove instead of a fist. And this fight between the new fascists and the old ones. And it is fascinating to observe. It is horrible to have to witness in real time, in the manner of the Chinese curse. We are living in very interesting times.
So Shahid, one thing that you and I before, we're both lawyers, constitutional law scholars, to me, I think that too many liberals, progressives, I don't think any radical leftist, but too many liberals have come up and came of age at a time where they expect the courts to be this sort of bastion of protecting rights. And of course, that's not been the history of this country. There was a brief shining moment, of course, during the 1950s and 60s, where we would occasionally see the courts intervene, but that's actually not been the case throughout U.S. history, has it? I mean, the courts have always been an instrument of capital and empire and the predatory class.
Generally speaking, yeah, what you're referring to, the Warren Court during those 2 decades, maybe 25 years, when the court did make substantial interventions. And I'm thinking about things like the way that congressional districts were apportioned, or this includes the era of civil rights jurisprudence, setting aside that maybe 25-year period. Most of our country's history has been defined by a judicial system that's been profoundly unwilling to allow social progress, not just doing things like upholding slavery and denying rights to working people and their families, but also doing things like looking the other way when there's military industrial corruption, doing things like allowing the political system to be openly bought and paid for by the highest donor, doing things like affirmatively eroding rights that at one point in our history, people did across the political spectrum seem to be quite proud of having been expanded. There was this sort of narrative that most people who go to law school get sort of taught at some point, that the court is, over the course of our nation's history, been expanding, for instance, the voting franchise to new classes of society, and it's this sort of like project of ever expanding inclusion. And that is absolute horseshit when contrasted with the historical record. And in the wake of the Dobbs decision, I think the latest vector that's been introduced to basically reverse that legacy.
So hold on, go back for the non-lawyers who may not be following it. The Dobbs decision was?
Thank you. That was the case that relatively recently overturned Roe versus Wade and denied women control over their own bodies.
And hold on. And let's remember that the Democrats could have absolutely codified a woman's right to bodily autonomy legislatively when they
Yes.
saw this threat coming and refused to do so. So
Yeah,
to
they
me,
saw a fundraising tool.
exactly.
Yeah,
Right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
and never ever forget that it was Hillary Clinton's memo to the Democratic National Committee back in the 2016 election to put forward Donald Trump as a serious candidate, as a quote, Pied Piper candidate. I mean, I'm telling you, man, folks, you got to go back and look at the history of it. The reality is that the Democratic Party leadership are it's not just callous and crass. These are our class enemies. They are more committed to the capitalist domestic capitalism and foreign policy based on empire and plundering from the global south, most of whom are black and brown, of course. They are most committed to that. And make no mistake, it is not the kind of crass, like we hate black and brown people. It's just business to them, right? Like in some respects, it's even more horrific because they just don't care, Shahid.
I fully agree with you. It's a new brand of colonialism that is only subtly differentiated from the kind that most people learn about as an object of supposed history, that I think is very much, once again, becoming a defining element of international foreign policy. I'm thinking about the president's belligerence towards Denmark and Greenland, for instance, or Panama. You know, we are back in a world where might unapologetically makes right. And this was a very much an inevitable consequence of liberals failing to live up to their own stated principles at moments in history when they had power, institutional power, to determine the contours of the future. A couple points of the discussion that come up to my mind here. One, you mentioned a few minutes ago, Al Gore in the 2000 election. And obviously that's relevant to the Bush versus Gore decision, but I want to examine that moment in time for a different reason. If you contrast Al Gore's rhetoric when he was running for the presidency versus after he had resigned the Supreme Court decision and the White House, and he was now just a private citizen, he was worlds apart. He became renowned in retrospect for being a climate champion, going around the country. He had this film, An Inconvenient Truth. He was absolutely vocal about climate chaos after he no longer had any institutional power. And in the times when he did, he might have been outspoken, but he certainly did not go to the mat in the way that he did rhetorically after it was, kind of too late for him to do anything about it formally. And this propensity of Democrats to be, lambs in office and then rhetorical tigers after they're retired, is part of the ruse, frankly. And when I ran against, one of the central pillars of the Democratic leadership, I aimed to invite a public debate about all of these issues. And what I instead got was the end of my career, and an invitation to start a new life in the mountains, which I'm grateful to have done. But, the unwillingness of the system to even tolerate debate itself, I think, is an indictment of whatever passes to be liberalism. There's nothing liberal about having oligarchs make $250 million in office through insider trading over the course of a generation while ducking public debates for 37 years.
Right.
I mean, and then to claim that that's democracy is just like, really, okay, good luck with that.
I mean, it really is absurd. And I think that this is something that I hope that viewers and listeners of Redneck Gone Green are going to have the confidence in ourselves and the self-respect to recognize that really it's up to us. We can't look to the leadership of the Democratic Party. We can't look to the courts. We should fight at every front. We should cede no place. And that includes, by the way, pool halls, bowling alleys, laundromats. Like, we've got to engage the conversation in all the places. And I'm going to tell you what, Shahid, and I know that, it's my white skin that lets me into these places, but I guarantee you can't take me into a pool hall or a bowling alley where I can't in 5 minutes stir up some good old fashioned class resentment about the ruling class, the boss man with his foot on our neck. A genuine left-wing populism would win the day. That's
it would, but
got to do.
I do not disagree at all, and I fully agree to sort of politicize all spaces. For a long time, my sort of self-appointed mission was to politicize dance floors, and that's what got me into sort of documentary house music. But this point about left-wing populism being ascendant, I fear one of the real dangers of this political moment that I'm concerned about is the right wing's co-optation of left-wing policy goals and the co-optation of populism in the service of this even further accretion of power and wealth in the hands of an ever tighter net of oligarchs. And there's one particularly skilled practitioner of this, what I would describe as like legislative hoodwinking, a little bit of like almost like a magic trick. And I grew up in rural Missouri and then St. Louis before I moved to Chicago for undergrad and then the Bay Area for law school. And Missouri, one of its senators in Washington is Josh Hawley, who is renowned, one, for being one of the faces of the January 6th insurrection. And also, I'm just going to talk about two bills that he's introduced. One 5 years ago, basically envisioned a universal basic income program, the very same kind of program that was endorsed by Bernie Sanders and long before him, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Josh Hawley has also more recently sponsored with Bernie Sanders a bill to cap consumer credit card interest rates at 10%. And these are measures that the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, as you put it before, or let's just say the Democratic Party, absent its progressive wing, has never seen fit to embrace. And the idea that, just like in the context of the Pentagon cuts, the idea that it's Republicans showing up for policies that Democrats could have rallied behind, could have, even if not passed, at least embraced to create more defining contrasts between themselves and now the figures that they themselves, the fascists, decry as fascists, right? There were opportunities to even fight losing battles, but battles that would define what the party's about. And it's never been about universal basic income. It's never been about capping credit card interest rates, right? They're always on the side of Wall Street. And so the real risk there that I see happening now is that with Trump in office and a Republican-led Congress, that they're going to start doing things like, just like Trump did in his first term, he wrote checks to taxpayers that had his name on them, right? Like a welfare state, basically purchasing the political allegiance of low information voters. And the idea that Democrats, they've had commanding majorities in Congress for many years over the last generation, that the federal minimum wage has remained stagnant at $7.25 an hour. And it is absurd to me that it would fall to Republicans to make these proposals, and that the threat of economic populism being ceded to the right wing by the failure of corporate Democrats to stand up for their own stated principles, I think is one layer to the cake that has yet to be baked. We're sort of observing a lot of ways in which Democrats fail to create space for Republicans and fascists who've now stepped into those voids. I fear that there's another void to be left, and yet more space, and for the horror to grow even more complex and multifaceted and disturbing and inexorable. I'll leave it at that.
No, look, Shahid, I appreciate you because of your ability to break it down without dumbing it down. Again, and folks, I will admit freely, Shahid is a personal friend, but I also say this with absolute sincerity. The man is a brilliant constitutional scholar. I have never had a conversation where I found him to say things that did not illuminate. But the other thing that you're able to do, Shahid, is to break it down without dumbing it down, right? You're able to communicate some pretty simple things, but you also use art and culture. So I don't want to embarrass you too much, but I also know you to be a hip hop artist, a spoken word poet. So I'm wondering if you've got anything cooking up that you might want to share with the Redneck Gone Green community.
So I have a rhyme I wrote about the Rehnquist Court 25 years ago. I'm going to have to take off my glasses to read it and get really close to the screen. So I don't know what that's going to do to the shot, but if you can tolerate that. Just give me a second here. Okay, so yeah, when I was in law school, one of the very first things that happened was the court's decision in Bush versus Gore. And so I think I wrote this probably in my third year of school. This country's insanity manifesting inside of me as I read Supreme Court opinions from the minions of Nixon. Fixing elections, mixing contradictory intellectual affections, vexing us by flexing judicial muscle, doing everything they can to contrive a racial tussle, them even being judges of professional hustle. See, we all know the president was never elected, but now tell me how you feel about Chief Justice Rehnquist. Before he picked Bush, he appointed himself, pushing his name off a shelf and adding it to a list that he was charged to make himself. What kind of tryst has been baking in Washington in the political oven since Nixon got bounced? up out of there with nothing, in handcuffs. Pardon me for making a fuss, but we're told to trust in our democracy. But let me tell you, all I see is a whole bunch of rich folks grubbing over money, inviting Condoleezza and Clarence Uncle Thomas to convince our moms that we can sit on the bus anywhere we like. But let's shine a little light. Can you sit where you want? Maybe you can, but mama's gaunt from only eating bread and salt. They'll try to tell you it's her fault that her gas got disconnected, even if it's the bank's mistake that went uncorrected. So mama went to work, except now she's affected by that illegitimate judge who directed the carpal tunnel syndrome that pummeled her at work, entitles her to no perks for disability from the jerks who make all kinds of money off her hands when they still worked. Are you feeling me? For her problem, she gets no money. Spend 10 minutes with these people, you'll be crying, tears streaming down your eyes at all the lies you heard. To make it right for her, we face a rearguard fight as these judges do their best to keep dissent out of sight, or so that the state can seem right about all that it decides. But back in the day, we find an independent press we thought to be the freedom to ensure all the rest, except like a game of chess, it's rather complex. So let's start with a hex for our boy Rehnquist. Unilaterally imposing social rules, saying Congress can't pass a law keeping guns out of schools or give battered women an opportunity to sue. Fool, you think Columbine's a symptom of our time? If you get nothing else from this rhyme, remember this. This shit is the product of strict constructionists like Rehnquist, Scalia, and their houseboy Thomas. I promise, all I'm saying right now is how it is. They're sitting on the bench, striking down Congress's attempts to fix the problems we pick to kick. Elected representatives lie and cheat and steal and scheme and demon semen to block out even light with their lies that make us realize that we're all lucky if they make lies we like. But then even if they do, strict constructionist Rehnquist with his sniper rifle trifling standing in the way of the democracy we fought for back in the day. And then they try to say to the lay citizens, hey, we're preserving constitutional principles, but pay attention to the lenses and prisms they employ, avoiding all accountability as they toy with our future fascist fashion, rehashing the laws. We descend deep down into the maw that we all saw back when they started hemming and hawing about so-called states' rights, which translates into the right to discriminate, commit hate crimes, pollute, dumping everything they find into sewers. Or let's take a newer issue, electoral skewers, to take the popular vote and set it aside so that Rehnquist and his cronies can together decide who will reside in the White House. And we, quiet as a mouse, acquiesce to let a terrorist lead us, minding our own business as the Supreme Court feeds us our own political asses on a plate.
That was awesome.
Man, I told you, Shane, like Shahid Buttar does not disappoint. And I also think, Shahid, I want to point out that you have had a history, like you were a constitutional law scholar. When I first met you, I think you were associated with the American Constitution Society. I know you also were the executive director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. You were a muckety-muck with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You've run for Congress as an explicitly anti-war, anti-imperial candidate. So you really, you've sued people. You've done legislative lobbying. You've run for office yourself. Like, I got to ask you, like, what do you see is the best case scenario for what ordinary folk can do? Because you've tried a lot of different things. So it is not me being Pollyannish. It's actually saying, ask the question, what is to be done? Because it feels like they have cut off every single avenue for us to engage in what we were taught as children is supposed to be how civic responsible people engage social change. What is to be done, Shahid Buttar?
I do think the institutions have co-opted and forces of corruption, fascists, what have you, have co-opted all of the institutional levers of power, that is to say the mechanisms for power over. And I'm not exactly sure where I got this framework. I've heard Star talk about power over, power under, and power within, power with and power within. And power with, I think, is the sort of crucial layer at which we have an opportunity still to cultivate something within our respective communities. You mentioned some of my work, and I appreciate it. It's kind of you. And I'll remind, the last time, or maybe the time before when I joined you, I reflected a little bit in one of my articles about meeting you. And I think the way I made an impression upon you was organizing street protests and speak outs with spoken word poets and hip hop MCs. And that layer of organizing, I think, remains available to all of us. Like, organizing within your physical reach, in your community, with your neighbors, like all of the online opportunities that have emerged in the last generation, I fear, may have been to a large extent a distraction from the more meaningful work of cultivating connections and networks with our neighbors. And we're going to need them. whatever the crisis is that is going to inevitably emerge to challenge whatever community any of your listeners live in, whether it's a climate disaster, whether it's, a crucial employer, some federal agency going offline and then the regulations allowing a local employer to run amok with like a local pollution scandal or abusing worker rights or a right-wing lynch mob invading your community, you're going to want to know your neighbors. And there's no better time to do it than before the crisis is at hand. And, I think that whether it's soup clubs, clothing swaps, opportunities to share resources, whatever mutual aid can look like in your community can be a pathway to building that kind of power with. And, I don't think there's going to be a lot of power over within the reach of anybody whose perspective I'd be very excited about anytime soon. So I just encourage people to take action within your reach, within your community.
I love
and maybe
it.
that requires, yeah, right on.
The phrase that resonates for me, and all of us who practice mutual aid, all we have is each other, right? Like at the end of the day, and I do want to, I'll just say I'm going to be both philosophical but also like really candid, because democracy really just means the people have the power or the people rule. Nobody today thinks that we live in a country in which we have a functioning democracy, right? Like I don't know anybody on the left, the right, or the center who actually thinks that this is anywhere remotely similar to a democratic republic. But done correctly, it means that we can, in fact, govern ourselves. And at the end of the day, there is something, I think, not just inspiring, but something that is like touches me at my very soul, Shahid. And that is, I don't believe that human beings are fundamentally angelic. I don't believe that humans are fundamentally demonic. I think that most of us, 95% of us, are going to do the things that we've incentivized to do. The problem is, in this racist, sexist, capitalist society, we have incentivized all the wrong fucking things. We are incentivizing power over. We are incentivizing domination. We are incentivizing exploitation. So there is a very real part of me that says, in light of this toxic soup and culture that we live in, the fact that there's so much beauty and that there's so many examples of mutual aid, so many examples of people coming together is actually inspiring to me. And I will end my little diatribe with this. I look at the history of the world, and Martin Luther King Jr. is correct. The arc of the universe is long, but it does bend towards justice. And the only way that you can actually get that arc to bend at all is when ordinary people find their common humanity, find the love and compassion and kindness, and practice it as a politic. I'll come off my soapbox now, y'all. But it really, like, I'm just reminded of my mama, that's Southern for grandmother, y'all, and my mama, who always just told me, like, we all reveal ourselves by our conduct, right? And I think about the number of times in my own community where I see random acts of kindness and compassion. And if you look for it, Shahid, it's everywhere.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And there's another layer, which, oh, go ahead, Shane, please.
I'm sorry. I was going to say it even happens here in New York City all the time.
Even there.
Not joking. Even in New York City in the cruelest part of winter.
New York as much as anywhere. I mean, I think about the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, or there was a big, there was a blackout in New York. I don't remember what year it was, like in the mid 2000s. And like everybody came together, like New York as much as anywhere else. People come together in moments of crisis. Wherever you are, of whatever stripe you are, it's what we do. As a species, because we're pretty weak alone, and together we can do amazing, incredible, world-changing or destroying things. And I was just going to riff, David, on your reflection on all of the beautiful projects happening. And I'm an immigrant myself, so I often, especially when thinking about constitutional law and like the defense of democracy against its contemporary threats, I think about Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a French immigrant at the early days of the Republic, who wrote this analysis of what he titled the work as Democracy in America. And one of his central insights is that what defined Americans was our propensity to organize, to associate, to do things. that were not government, that were not work, like other things, like the Insert Here Club, the Bridge Club, the Chess Club, in the last year, just like random projects I've been a part of have been like reforesting burn scars by planting trees in different parts of the area near where I live, supporting an event for local young adults with special needs. All of these associations that we come together to try to do things for each other. In Europe, there's not as much of a culture of that. It tends to be much more, institutionally driven. And de Tocqueville saw that as the root of what it meant to be American 250 years ago. And one hopes that some vestige of that sensibility remains, because I think that's what we are each called to do in this moment in time, is to plant seeds. And I hope to see many of them grow.
Shahid Buttar, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, and this hour has just absolutely flown by. So before we conclude, I do want to give you a chance for any final remarks, and I'm going to encourage folks, if you are not a subscriber, as I am, to Chronicles of a Dying Empire, which is where Shahid Buttar posts his most recent writing, you should do so. So I'm going to do the promo piece on Chronicles of a Dying Empire on Substack, but I do want to give you any final thoughts.
You're kind. I'm grateful for the chance to reflect on some of this. I really wish that the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party could either have been meaningfully challenged or shifted at points in time when it mattered. And I just hope that at this moment in time, we can burn it to the ground finally and leave it in the dustbin to create some new actual opposition to the chaos that is not only unfolding now, but is set to continue unfurling for the next, let's just be real here, 4 years. And if we are going to strap in for the long haul, I think, making sure that the opposition is unco-opted is a good first step. And, that's one reason why I'm excited to talk to you as a voice outside that institutional ecosystem, that we can be critical of the lesser evil to which everyone seems still inclined to defer nonsensically. And I'm grateful for the life I've had a chance to lead and to, reflect upon all this stuff from the, a literal armchair as opposed to having a closer hand to it. I do think that hope is a thing that is hard for some people to find at a time like this. And it's another reason to organize. Just I wanted not to leave that on the table. We organize not only to achieve whatever discrete end brings us together in common cause, but also to stand in community. And there's can be a great deal of hope and connection that emerges from that project, whatever the outcome of our efforts. And, even if it is just to give yourself someone else with whom to process whatever otherwise has you gnashing your teeth at night, I would encourage everybody who's listening to find some neighbors and build that community, whether it's through music or some project or, mutual aid, watching each other's kids, whatever, just find some excuse to connect, because we're going to need all the connections we can.
Thank you, Shahid Buttar, constitutional law scholar, DJ, hip hop artist, spoken word artist, snowboarder, and personal friend. Come back to Redneck Gone Green. We want to keep you. People need to hear this voice.
I'll be honored. You're kind, brother. Thanks for having me, and great to meet you, Shane.
You too, brother.
Love. So Shane, looky here, man. Before we end our program today, I got to ask you, man. Like I told you, Shahid was going to come spit and fire from a legal perspective. But what'd you think, man? Do you reckon that his critique of the failure, both of the Democratic Party and of the legal system, how'd that land for you?
Well, it's gut-wrenching to hear such an honest reality being described with such succinct knowledge and I've been a fan of Shahid since he ran for Congress. I was in San Francisco actually during his campaign, and so I've been right on par with his message for a long time. The Democratic Party is not going to save us. We've known this for a long time, and they subsisted on let's get by with choosing the lesser of two evils for the last 10 years or so. That's been their whole fucking ploy. Exposing it wherever we can is a great thing to do, and I think he did a great job of really pointing out all the ways in which the system itself is actually set up to fail us as a whole. And at the end, bringing it on home about building community and connecting with one another. We keep saying that over and over again on this program. It's time to run towards one another and stop fighting over little dumb shit. Because we, at the end of the day, I agree with exactly what he said. We are the ones going to have to save ourselves. So I thought it was great. He did a great job explaining it too.
And I appreciate you. And you're the one who actually used that phrase, like not just turn towards each other, but running towards each other. And again, I'm going to quote my mama who said, if you look for ways that you disagree with somebody, guess what you're likely to find?
Exactly right.
Disagreement. And if you look for ways that you can work together, guess what you're likely to find? So again, I'm not papering over disagreements. We should have principled struggle and have conversations. And if you hear something that I say that you disagree with, I welcome the critique and the criticism and the conversation. But at the end of the day, I wish that we on the left were looking for more opportunities to build together than we are to tear each other down. And that really has been heartbreaking to me, Shane, to watch like George Jackson said it best, settle your quarrels. Like, like we've got work to do here, man. And this is serious business.
It is. And I see, I'm given hope. Like Shahid mentioned earlier, you see little pockets of community building happening all over the country. And it does give me hope. Whether they're coming together to build something, or what I've seen lately where people are coming together to stand up against what they thought they had voted for and are now finding out that that's wrong. That's still community. They're still coming together. And I think that Shahid is right in saying that a leftist ideology, like look at what Bernie did. I think that's still on the table. He's out there doing it again, and people
he's drawing standing room only crowd in Nebraska, in Iowa, and
right.
While the leadership of the Democratic Party are basically saying there's nothing to be done, Bernie Sanders, an independent, is going out into deep red territory and bringing in record number crowds. I mean, I think that there's a lesson to be learned here.
I agree. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting watch. I hope everybody out there today enjoyed Shahid's comments. Thank you all for your comments. You got anything else you want to close out with?
No, I'll just close out with an appreciation to you, Shane, who is serving not only as co-host, but basically you're the technical producer of this program. This is I think our third program, and I feel like we're really hitting a stride here on Redneck Gone Green. And I'm really just, I'm as we say where we're from, Shane, I'm tickled pink with the direction that we're going. And I want to make sure that everybody recognizes the importance of liking, commenting, subscribing. Like, I know that people say that all the time, but the reason they say it, y'all, is because that's the only way to what they call organically reach people, right? Like, the algorithm is used to prevent us from building an audience, but we're already beginning to build an audience, and in large part because although Redneck Gone Green is its own independent show, we are honored and humbled that Rick Wolf and the folks over at Democracy at Work have seen fit to invite us onto their platform. So I'm going to ask y'all to help us build this audience so that we can be worthy of the confidence that the folks at Democracy at Work have put into us. The last thing I'm going to say, Shane, is, man, next week we've got Kali Akuno of Co-operation Jackson joining this program. So this is one you don't want to miss. Remember, that's going to be a Monday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. East Coast time. That'll be March 5th, Kali Akuno of Co-operation Jackson. In the meantime, Shane, I'm going to say, keep on keeping on. Can't stop, don't stop. Peace.
All right, brother. Take care. Have a good week.